Okay, so this is quite a shift for our channel, and I feel it requires an explanation before we get to it. But out of respect for your time, I will have a timestamp up on the screen if you wish to get to just the story. Well, hold on, what is this about? You're a gaming channel, aren't you? No, we're not. This is actually a channel about a state of mind, and gaming is just our way of channeling that state of mind. Okay, so what is this specifically about then? An interesting project, and I think it is interesting because it came from an unlikely place. It came from Reddit. We didn't expect to make this into a YouTube video. It wasn't meant to be a YouTube video. And the premise of it was incredibly simple. It was just a joke. We had previously read some stories on the subreddit r/TIFU, and they were, they were whatever, mediocre, boring, banal in nature, regular. But it got us thinking, can we come up with an absurd story, a stupidly absurd story, and get people to believe it? Well, after some brainstorming and reflecting on real-life experiences, we came up with a fun little idea. Basically, it's a story about a homeless man and his pet raccoon. If you've lived in the South, you've seen this kind of thing. The protagonist, me in the subreddit, basically gets into a conflict with him at a gas station. Now, the original draft was written in such a way that it was a little bit imperfect. It had grammatical inconsistencies, it had cultural references, it had mistakes. It was written in such a way to make it look like it was sincere and that I was panicked. And what was the result, you think? It was beautiful. A complete success. Everyone bought it. Everyone believed it. No one doubted it. And since the story involved a detailed account of a crime, I actually got messages giving me legal advice on what to do next. So we knew people had bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. We later wrote a continuation basically to say that the protagonist was feeling very guilty about the matter, but that he had not surrendered himself. But it became apparent that this was becoming literary, interesting. There was more to this than some stupid Reddit story. We scrapped the Reddit idea. We didn't care about it anymore. As of recording this, quite a lot of the novel has been written. And looking back at these early chapters, listening to them, I can tell you this much. Whatever you think it is not. It is something completely different. This came from somewhere else. And it is going to be really interesting. I think a lot of people will enjoy this, regardless of your background. So I hope that you will trust us. Trust us in that we have done our due diligence. We have done a lot of revisions. We've done a lot of discussions. But that is not even the most important thing. This was not written purely out of rationale. This was written in states of mind. And sometimes we waited a long time to get it right. Each part was actually fought over a lot. It was felt out. It was a little bit self-generated. And that is why I feel this is probably the most sincere content we have on this channel, and probably the most important content we have on this channel. This is the most important thing I wish to share. My partner has done a great job reading this. It's surprising even to me, and I enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy it, so enjoy.
Chapter 1. Today, I screwed up big time. My adrenaline is still racing, so forgive me if I write some run-on sentences. I grew up in a city in the American South, but for the past few years I had to move away from my family for a lucrative job offer. In my youth, I was especially close to my grandparents, so they always want me to visit as much as possible. It's not that long of a drive, so I try to do it whenever I can, since they're getting up in their years. I drove over without any incident, but I was getting really tired because I hadn't slept too well that night, and I did want to visit Nana while in zombie mode. So, I stopped at a gas station. I used to visit this place daily back in high school. My friend and I didn't like the cafeteria food, so we just got some Slim Jims and Slurpees there. The owner was from India, and he was really concerned with people stealing stuff, so whenever high schoolers wanted to get gas station food, he would only let 2 or 3 teenagers in at a time and watch them closely. Today, I also had to stand in the queue. And whatever. It took me back a few years when I was still in high school, too. There was actually one piece of strangeness here that reminded me that this wasn't just a random gas station, but my gas station. There was this really big, tacky, colorful ad, which had probably been made by someone's 14-year-old son in GIMP. It was an ad for Bob's Croc Farm, which is like a redneck Disneyland featuring observation posts, live feeding shows, and a gift store, filled to the brim with tacky trinkets and memorabilia. You sometimes can't help but wonder what the factory workers in China think when they produce yet another batch of such consumer trash. Probably nothing. They probably don't even notice. Just as I was finishing admiring the ad, it happened. This shirtless dude carrying a raccoon cradled up against his man-tit. From the angle I was looking at it, it almost looked like the thing was suckling or biting him. Just cuts in line and knocks on the glass door. One of the high schoolers mumbled, "What the hell, dude?" But no one really tried to stop him. I stood in silence, just watching curiously, observing him. His hat almost looked like it had fused to his unkempt graying hair, and his face was extremely worn, even though he was probably only 10 years my elder. By the state of his teeth, I would have to guess he did drugs, but I'm no doctor. The owner saw him, and his eyes went from half-lidded apathetic to wide, crazy-eyed Nicolas Cage in The Vampire's Kiss. He cracked the door open and tersely asked Coon Man what the hell he wanted. The owner's son, who manned the cash register, was clearly getting really tense in there. I know that shit might go south at any moment. Anyway, this guy started talking about how we need to have compassion for the creatures of the forest and so on, and then finished with how he just needs a bit of water for Randy. The owner complied and gave him some water in a big gulp cup. At this point, it had been 5 minutes, and I started to get really impatient. He stood in the doorway just letting his raccoon drink from the cup. I wasn't going to leave without my coffee. I said as politely as I could muster in my agitated, tired state, "I'm sorry, but can you go do that somewhere else?" That's when it all began. The way he looked at me with those sunken, hazy blue eyes, I knew I'd just asked for a fight. Without skipping a beat, he directed a new insane tirade at me. He went on ranting how I needed to love nature and how a raccoon is not a pet because no one can own anyone under natural law. The raccoon didn't seem to mind this. It was used to it. Meanwhile, I was maintaining a respectable 10-foot perimeter of space between myself and the man, circling around him as he tried to get closer to me. After failing to close the distance, he started shouting obscenities at me. I had expected it, but it was still so abrupt and loud that I felt lost. Under the hail of insults, a white noise enveloped my senses. I felt frangible and out of place. It made me feel jittery and irritable. I could hardly stand without rocking a bit. After a minute of this banal nonsense, I just couldn't take it. I was finished. I screamed, perhaps even roared, "Fuck off!" Randy the raccoon was so startled that it jumped, struggled, and scratched the shit out of the vagrant. Once it slipped out of the man's grasp, the coon immediately booked it across the street. Cars stopped and honked at it. The fact that I had nearly killed his sort of pet enraged the hobo, so much so that he charged and took an anemic swipe at me. I saw it telegraphed enough to easily step out of the way and said, "Yo man, calm down. I don't want to fight you." As I saw him getting ready to swing at me again, something just snapped in my mind. Without a thought, I socked him right in the nose. Between the adrenaline and the suddenness of it all, I hit him twice as hard as I intended. I felt something give when I hit him, so I knew I did some damage. The vagrant stumbled against the glass door, trying to catch something to hang on to, but he was too weak and collapsed in front of it. At that point, I knew I had precious seconds to skedaddle, so I did. I hopped into my car and floored it. I was so psyched that I accidentally bumped the curb while getting the hell out of there. The last thing I remember was the Indian man in the doorway glaring at me because he couldn't actually step out of his own shop. The door opens outwards. He was angry at the fact that I was abandoning the scene, and it would be he alone who would have to explain the situation to the police. I felt immediate regret as I drove. Regardless of how provocative this fellow had been, I was the stronger person in this situation. I had abused that position. I could have done a lot of things differently, and I had known it long before he started swinging at me. Instead, I just let it go. Why? Perhaps because I thought it could resolve on its own. Perhaps because I still wanted to act like I wasn't involved. Perhaps because I didn't really care. And perhaps because I just didn't want to touch him or care about him in any way, shape, or form. It's bizarre to think of it now, but even punching him felt dirty.